Hello watch enthusiasts! Now bearing in mind that it's the start of a new month, it really is time to speak about the releases seen over the past month. And we certainly have seen a lot in terms of variation between different watches shown, because there's been everything from a very interesting and highly colourful new watch from Rado, all the way through to somewhat monochromatic and very detailed but somewhat minimalistic models from Habring and Nomos, and of course a rather fascinating and completely novel Grand-Seiko Quartz watch with a GMT function, which is very much the first of its kind in their range. But as you can see, this picture which we're starting with, which I'm not actually going to speak about, is a picture of the JLC Reverso Tribute Tourbillon Duo Face, which celebrates the 185th anniversary of the brand and really is a beautiful piece to look at, albeit not something which is affordable or accessible for the vast majority of us. It does still showcase quite an incredible level of watchmaking, and something really beautiful to see. Now before speaking about this first watch, I think one has to address what this watch pays homage to. Because in 1919 the Bauhaus School of Art and Design was founded in Weimar, before it moved in the mid-1920s to the famous building in Dessau, where it really reached its maturity in terms of having a really incredible and truly recognisable design style. These were designs which were rooted in living, in terms of being practical but also highly elegant, where a great emphasis was placed on the health and the well-being of the students there. In fact, simply looking at the sorts of teachers who were able to teach at this particular and very impressive school, one really can get an understanding of just how important it was in terms of a change in aesthetics at the start of the century, with individuals teaching such as Kandinsky and Mies van der Rohe. So one really gets an understanding of just the calibre of teaching and the calibre of school this was. And certainly in terms of aesthetics and designs, one sees a design language, whether it's architecture or simple design, or even art. One really can get an understanding of the impact this has had on the world and on our designs. And Nomos is very regularly described as having a very Bauhaus-inspired design, with very clean styles, and a somewhat subtle but extremely well executed aesthetic. Of course, one has to remember that Nomos is no newcomer to producing these celebration models for former art movements, as one has to remember that previously they did produce the very beautiful and extremely well executed version of their Orion to celebrate the De Style art movement, with the work of Mondrian, for example. But I feel this Bauhaus model is perhaps going to be one of the most popular, because it's a beautiful piece and I think uses Nomos' most classical design, which is of course the Tangente. And this model has that cylindrical case with those beautiful cut and extremely two-dimensional lugs, which I absolutely love, which offset the design very well and prevent the watches from looking too much like any other dress watch. Of course, these watches also feature a sapphire crystal and the 3-atmosphere water resistance, which we've come to expect from these pieces as nothing more than dress watches, and so they're not designed to take the outdoor elements too abruptly, but nonetheless are able to appear very much modern and very much wearable in a world of larger dress watches. And so these watches do come in 3 sizes, with a 33mm version, which is the smallest, a 35mm version, which is the real classic of this design, and the full 38mm if you want something larger. But in terms of the version they've chosen the manually wound version, which uses their Nomos Alpha caliber, which is well known in terms of being a reliable and robust, if somewhat simple, manually wound movement. But I must say the simplicity of the movement is no problem for me, because I think the way they've executed it is excellent. The movement is beautifully decorated with excellent level of finishing throughout, whether it's on the balance cock, or on the general bridges, or indeed on the winding wheels. What is a shame with this watch, though, is the fact that they haven't fitted it with an exhibition caseback, which I think is something one really should go for if you're going for a Nomos, because it gives a beautiful view of the movement. Of course, the benefit of this, though, is that the price is lower, which makes these watches more accessible for more people, which certainly is still a nice factor in buying one of these watches, bearing in mind the fact that they are very limited. Of course, with its 17 joule movement and its 43-hour power reserve, it remains unchanged from a technical perspective to the standard watch. However, what does change is the dial, and there are 3 dial variants available, with 100 pieces being made of each dial variant for each size. And these come with a base colour, which is this sketch paper tone, which is a matte yellowed sort of parchment colour, which works extremely well to create the tone of, as is suggested by the name, sketching paper. Of course, this draws from the fact that this was a school where students would learn effectively to draw and indeed to design, which is rather an interesting touch when you consider the fact that these watches are of course finished products. Then of course there's the touch of colour around the edge of the dial, which celebrates some of the colour used in, for example, the masters' houses, where the teachers and masters of the school would live beside the school in Dessau. And so one has this trio of red, blue and yellow to complement these dials extremely well. There are 2 details about these watches, though, which I think really make them in terms of an object on the market. And the first of these things are the hands, which, rather than being blued, have been treated with an oxide layer, and so made black, which match the indices and allow the hands to not obscure the colour of the dial, or indeed of whichever of the three choices of rings around the dial you choose. And I think this really does help to unify the watch and prevent any sort of overbearing style from the hands. And the second point about these watches is the price, which I think has been very reasonably chosen. For the 33mm version, the price is £1,260, whilst it rises to £1,360 for the 35mm, which will probably be the most popular, and a £1,520 price is the one for the 38mm version. And so I think these make very, very beautiful, but also truly unique models for someone who really enjoys Nomos watches, but wants a piece of history in the process of buying one. Founded a year ago, Ming watches have come an extremely long way in terms of creating some fascinatingly high quality, but also remarkably affordable pieces, with their brand based in Malaysia but producing their watches in Switzerland. And the design is unique. One sees this circular form to their cases with these flared lugs, and the highest quality materials used really in every component of these watches. And I had the pleasure of handling these in March, and they really were wonderful to see. These are timepieces where an attention to detail that's rarely seen has been put into every component, whether it's the crown, the dial, the hands, or the simple general design of the whole watch. And so they're celebrating their first anniversary now, and so have released two new models which showcase new builds and also colours which one hasn't seen from the brand before, especially using titanium to its fullest potential. And the two variants they've chosen to release on their first anniversary are the 1703 Blue and the Ultra Blue. Now these are very limited run pieces, with the Blue coming in at 125 pieces and the Ultra Blue at only 25. But they're pieces which have a case design and a case build, which means they're usable every day, but also as highly luxurious but also very interesting pieces. Now they come in a 38mm Grade 2 titanium case, which is only 9.8mm thick, which is impressive, bearing in mind they're 100 metres water resistant. Now the case is of course one of the details which varies between the Blue and the Ultra Blue, because the standard Blue version, which is the more affordable of the two, comes in a bare Grade 2 titanium brushed case, which is given this wonderful form with, as you can see, these lugs which flare outwards to complement the crown, which is also onion-shaped in its form, except of course it's sharp-edged, which is a nice touch and prevents it from looking too old-fashioned. The Ultra Blue, however, is a very, very different animal. This piece features the same Grade 2 titanium case, however in its case, it's been blued by hand. And this creates an incredibly rich blue effect throughout the case, which isn't indeed identical to any other because it's done by hand by Ming, their founder. And so this creates a unique effect which really changes the colour of the titanium to match the dial to some degree. And indeed, if you do buy one of these, you do get a matching buckle for the strap in this blued titanium. But the dials on these watches are the same, indeed the other features are the same, because they feature these multi-layered dials, with that central section in sunburst blue being a GMT hand which runs around that 24-hour graduation, which is fitted to that ring with the Ming branding at 12 o'clock. Running around the edge of the dial, one also has these characteristic Ming-style indices, where a single ring connects all of the indices which are in the form of Arabic numerals, and of course all of these aspects of the dial are luminescent, as are the hands, to give the watch a crisp and highly modern glow in the dark, which is both appealing and extremely helpful if you want to wear this watch every day. Though of course there is no second hand, but I don't think that's a real problem, bearing in mind the hands have been beautifully capped and match the rest of the dial very, very well. Where the movement is concerned, I think Ming have made a very good choice in choosing the Sleater SW330-1 GMT. And so effectively this is the Sleater equivalent of something like an ETA 289 series GMT movement. However, this movement is a top-grade movement and has a 42-hour power reserve, runs at 4 Hz, and has 25 joules. But whilst it's not chronometer certified, it does have the additional detail of having been adjusted in 5 positions and tested for a full 250 hours to ensure accuracy and to ensure the watch will run smoothly. Of course, these two versions of the watch do come with different prices. For the standard 1703 Blue, which is limited to 125 pieces, you get, as far as the whole package goes, 2 nubuck straps, plus the option of an additional titanium bracelet, which is really a fantastic idea because they really do make wonderful bracelets for these watches. And the price for these watches runs from 1,525 Swiss francs for the version without the bracelet, and 1,825 for the version with it. And if you're one of the lucky few who managed to get hold of one of the 1703 Ultra Blue models, one indeed of the only the 25 made, Then you get a dark blue Alcantara Jean Rousseau strap to match the case, in addition to a dark chocolate brown nubuck strap with white stitching, and an anthracite nubuck strap also with white stitching. In addition to this, you get 3 buckles, all of which are in titanium, with the 2 which go with the nubuck straps in standard grade 2 titanium, whilst the version on the Jean Rousseau strap is fitted with a beautiful blued surface, which matches the case and has been done in the same procedure. And these do cost a bit more at 2,500 Swiss francs, but nonetheless, for a 25-piece limited edition of this style, I think that's quite an incredible price. Now, speaking of titanium watches, Rado has released a new model in their line of Captain Cook dive watches. And whereas the Captain Cook released at Baselworld last year was certainly a very interesting piece with 100-metre water resistance, and a really very beautiful design from the 50s and 60s, this model comes in as the Mark III, as being a far more technical watch, and perhaps further in line with their titanium models released that year, which came in a larger case size. However, this model comes in a 70s design with that yellow and black theme. But starting with the general specifications of this watch, it comes in grade 5 titanium, which is sandblasted to give this fantastic matted effect which contrasts the polished crowns. And the case is certainly a large one, at 46.8mm from side to side, 48.3mm from tip to tip, and 13.9mm thick from the top of that domed sapphire crystal through to the case back of the watch with its decoration. But this watch certainly isn't lacking in detail, because one sees the watch has 2 crowns in that super compressor style, with the top crown operating the internal bezel, which provides these graduations and a yellow marking for the first 15 minutes. Then, of course, the rest are in black and white, which I think help to give this watch a very balanced aesthetic, but something somewhat retro, but whilst not appearing altogether too old-fashioned. In truth, though, it's really the details with this watch that make the timepiece, because the dial itself is extremely complex and should be overly busy, with those very large yellow and white hands in the form of these swords. But one has the day-date complication, which is nicely balanced in black and white, whilst the indices are beautifully applied and match the colour of those first 15 minutes, which I rather like as an aesthetic feature. Likewise, they've kept the Rado logo, but moved it down to the bottom of the dial, in order to allow that anchor logo, which rotates on a central pivot, to dominate the top half of the dial, and keep things clean, crisp and highly attractive. And water resistance on this watch is 220 metres, which is a rare water resistance rating, really, for these watches, usually being 200 or 300, with some rare examples being 250. But that gives 720 feet, and really enough for anyone who's going diving, apart from individuals who do a lot of professional saturation diving. The movement chosen inside this watch is the ETA C07.621, which is effectively an ETA 2836-2 base, which of course features 25 joules and in this case runs at 3 Hz. And the reason for this is that they've increased the power reserve to 80 hours as opposed to the usual 40 or so you would get from the watch running at 4 Hz. And so this adds a certain amount of functionality to the watch which otherwise wouldn't be present, and helps the watch to be a more practical piece if you want to use it every day, or if you feel that you want to wear another watch for a few days whilst you leave this watch, say, on your desk or in your watch box. And of course, other than that, it does have the day-date complication, which is another feature which is very helpful for a lot of people and helps the watch to become perhaps a more complete package. This rather curious dive watch will hit markets in October, and in the US it will only be sold via Macy's as a result of an agreement, but throughout the rest of the world, indeed in the UK where I'm based, it should be available through anywhere where Rado is normally sold. However, no price has yet been available for UK sellers, but the US price is $2,550 US. Across the industry, it really is accepted that the Grand-Seiko 9F Quartz movement, which is now celebrating its 25th anniversary, is one of the finest on the market. Of course, there have been some really incredible quartz movements across the years, like for example the Rolex Oyster Quartz. But this really has stood the test of time, because it's a movement which is able to offer incredible accuracy, which I will talk about in more detail with these particular watches, but also which is able to offer a durability and also a quality which just isn't seen elsewhere. These are quartz movements which are assembled by watchmakers, they're decorated by watchmakers, and they're entirely made out of metal. They're also produced with specially selected quartz crystals, which are particularly chosen for their age, and indeed also for any details that they may have in terms of being suitable for the particular fit. And so there's a great deal of care taken when choosing the quartz crystal. but also these are fully decorated, which is a really beautiful thing to see, especially through exhibition casebacks of some of the Grand-Seiko Quartz watches. However, they've chosen to release a 25th anniversary model, and whilst they did already celebrate it with 2 other 25th anniversary models, with these pieces they're looking to the future instead of the past. Because these watches, and indeed this limited edition, are the first GMT versions of this groundbreaking and very historic movement. And Grand-Seiko has chosen to celebrate this 25th anniversary and start this new GMT line with 3 new models, one of which is a limited edition, whilst 2 are not. And I'll start with the general shared specifications these watches have, because they're all watches which are 39mm in diameter by 12.1mm thick, making them a very wearable size, with a beautifully finished case, which is a very complex case in many ways, and does draw from Grand-Seiko's history in terms of its forms, but nonetheless remains something rather different, with quite significant crown guards, and indeed these beautiful polished facets, which run right the way down the side of the case, and down the lugs, past those drilled lug holes, all the way down to the edge of the bracelet. Of course, these watches are stainless steel, and so they are Zaratsu finished with this incredible polishing, which gives a really brilliant luster to Seiko watches, and is something which one can appreciate all across the Seiko line, because the quality of their watches, from the low end to the ultra high end in their Grand-Seiko range, is always incredible. Then one has a bezel which is very reminiscent of something like a Rolex Explorer 2, with 24-hour graduations running around its edge in this brushed finish, which again is a very fine finish, but I think helps to give the watch a slightly more bold look than its details might suggest. Then, of course, if one looks to the crown, one sees that it is guarded very carefully, and thus the watch does have a 100-metre water resistance, which is helpful to make this watch a very versatile outdoors sort of timepiece. To match these sporting credentials, the watch does also feature a double-domed anti-reflective sapphire crystal to protect the front of the watch. And then, of course, if one looks to the movement, one sees something which is highly impressive, which is their GMT function 9F movement. And they've called this the 9F86, which features a high-torque stepping motor, as do all of their 9F movements, but also it is anti-magnetic to 60 Gauss, which is 4800 amperes per meter, in addition to having an instant date change, and of course that GMT function. And likewise, to help the functionality of this watch, it also does feature an independent hour hand, which means you can jump between time zones very easily without the inconvenience of having to reset the GMT hand and stop the seconds if you're changing the standard time. Then of course there's the legendary accuracy of this movement, which truly is remarkable, because this movement is thermally tested between 5 degrees and 35 degrees C, though the actual accuracy of the movement depends upon which version of the watch you go for, because there are 3. Now, the variants that have been released come in the form of the SBGN 003 and 005, which are models which are non-limited editions. And one sees this in their dial, because these versions feature either a black or a blue dial with red accents in glossy or matted effects depending upon the model. One also sees a variation in the date wheel colour in order to match the dial, where the sunburst blue has that white date wheel, whilst the matte black features a black one to match it in that form. And these versions simply feature GMT at the bottom of their dial, as you can see, and this is because they're accurate 10 seconds per year. Of course, one puts this into context, the fact that most mechanical movements can't keep to 10 seconds a day. One really has to accept the advantages of having one of these quartz movements. However, if you go for what is the higher end model, if you will, which is the SBGN 001, you get the limited edition version. And this is limited to 800 pieces, and I'll talk about the price difference at the end, though it's not particularly significant between it and the non-limited edition versions. Because this features a beautiful textured dial with that 9F logo replicated around the surface of the dial in this embossed pattern. The dial also appears to have a slight anthracite colour, whilst it also has a sunburst effect, which creates a wonderfully complex satin look. In addition to this, the accents are yellow on that black anthracite style of base, which create a wonderful pop in terms of the colour difference, but also allow you to tell the standard timekeeping features apart from the GMT functions. And of course, all of the models feature a beautifully finished dial, because one sees these incredibly sharply cut hands with brushed patterns on the surface, and then of course polished edges where they've been cut into these real swords. To match these, one has these beautiful applied markers, which are also gorgeously cut from metal and polished to an incredible level, with these sharp edges brush tops, and of course luminescent sections around the edge of them, in addition to luminescent sections on the hands, and of course on that GMT hand to make it more legible. However, the differentiation of this model from the standard versions is seen in that 5-pointed star at 6 o'clock, because that star denotes the fact that these watches are accurate to 5 seconds per year, which, whilst twice as accurate as the standard versions, is obviously not something you'll notice particularly. But I feel just knowing the fact that this watch is accurate to that sort of level is a really remarkable feat. And where pricing is concerned, these watches vary, so the SPGN 003 and the 005 come in at €3,200, which I think is very reasonable, bearing in mind the fact that these are really the pinnacle of what Grand-Seiko can do with their quartz movements, whilst the limited edition version of 800 pieces is €3,600, so a bit of a premium, but nonetheless I think nothing obscene, and nothing stupid really in terms of pricing, for something which is a remarkable product which competes very, very well with something like a Rolex Explorer 2, if you want something slightly more left field, and you're looking for something different than a pure mechanical watch. The final watch today is a product of Habring. And Habring is an Austrian company that is of course produced by the Habrings, notably Richard Habring, who worked for IWC in the 80s and 90s. But they're a brand which produces a great deal of very interesting, if rather minimalistic watches, with an enormous amount of watchmaking craft going into them. So they've produced some really fascinating complications on some of their other watches. And this piece I'd like to speak about today is the new Chrono-Felix Monopusher chronograph. And it's a stainless steel 38.5mm watch with a 10.5mm thickness. And this is very much a classic chronograph in its most traditional form, simply having the time and the seconds in addition to a 30-minute chronograph. And one has this operated via a Monopusher control placed at the 2 o'clock position. And in many ways this watch is a fascinating balance between complexity and simplicity, because where the simplicity is concerned, the watch has a beautiful polished stainless steel case with a very delicate dial and a wonderful arrangement with that Monopusher and the crown, creating a classically correct but beautifully executed watch. And in terms of the way it's produced, the dial is perhaps the centrepiece in terms of what you'll be looking at the most, because the surface of the dial is beautifully grained in this silver, with a very simple approach in terms of the graduations, simply having the seconds graduated around the dial, and of course 12 o'clock at the 12 o'clock position, which is available in black or indeed in red, which is perhaps my favourite. Then one has the choice of hands, which come either in blued steel, this wonderful thermally blued colour, or in glossy black if you want something more minimalistic, or rather more modern, as opposed to this more old-fashioned style of blued coloration. And the piece which is perhaps most appreciated on the dial is that bicompax layout. And this is something which isn't characteristic of a Veltro 7750 form of movement, where normally the subdials are vertically mounted, but this has no ordinary Veltro 7750, as I'll explain in a bit. Underneath the domed sapphire crystal, those subdials are sunken slightly to add to their detail and have these concentric rings which are a nice touch, whilst having that additional arrow halfway along the minute counter just adds to the complexity somewhat and helps to build its form. And the choice of movement is an interesting one, because it is theoretically an in-house movement, and I certainly would class it as such, because it's the Habring A11C-H1, which is derived from their A11 movement, which was created from the experience that Richard Habring has with this historical movement from the 70s. Because it's a movement which has been built and developed enormously in terms of what it's been produced with, based upon what other brands have done. However, what they've done here is completely rework it, and indeed the movement itself is entirely made by Habring, though they do use some ETA parts because they have some left over on the early models. You won't be seeing these on later versions as a result of the fact that they will be making all of their parts themselves. Of course, this watch is rather slender for a Veltro 7750 style of movement, bearing in mind the fact that it's 10.5mm thick. And of course this is helped by the fact that it is manually wound as opposed to being automatic, in a similar way to the Veltro 7760, which is the manually wound equivalent. However, this version has been reworked to have this horizontal layout, and of course you see skeletonized elements in the movement which really help to give it a wonderful look, but also to have that Monopusher arrangement. And of course it will be a very reliable movement as a result of that build, but one's able to have the fantastic balance of that dial arrangement with a movement which is extremely well proven, and which, through the work of Habring, is something which you can really rely upon and have something very interesting, but with a historic and highly tested movement. And as per Habring's traditional way of doing things, the decoration on the movement is relatively minor in terms of giving it very deep levels of decoration throughout, but it's extremely tastefully done, and you get blued screws and indeed a blued element on the cam system for the chronograph, in addition to some perlage around some of the plates, and a general decoration which is very, very carefully done, with skeletonized elements, and general detail which is rather beautiful, and I think complements the dial very well, bearing in mind the fact that this watch is designed to be a model which is by no means going to be the most popular of chronographs on the market, bearing in mind that it's competing with its €6,250 price tag with the likes of the Omega Speedmaster. Instead, this is a watch with a much more subtle appeal, because it's a piece of real craftsmanship and a handmade watch with an extraordinary amount of detail and decoration, in terms of being a really beautiful watch, in terms of the care taken with the dial, with the paint on the dial, the printing of the logo, the simplicity of it all, and of course that beautiful movement. And so whilst it may not be the most popular of watches, I think it's a wonderful thing to have on the market, and is a really fascinating piece to take a look at. And I'll conclude the video there, but do tell me in the comments down below which of these watches you liked the most, and if there were any that you didn't like, or indeed if there was anything that intrigued you. And so if you did enjoy the video, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel, and to be able to enjoy more content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is Armand the Watch Guy,